showing up, listening, and letting these words confirm what your spirit already knew. You're shifting the atmosphere, and trust me, heaven notices. Now let's make one thing clear from the start. You were never blind. You were simply silent. You weren't late. You were patient. You didn't miss the signs. You were the sign. And now that you've stopped pretending, now that you've stopped dimming your insight to protect fragile egos, their illusion is collapsing under the weight of what they thought you never noticed. While they were laughing, you were watching. While they schemed, you were collecting every detail with divine precision. They thought they were playing chess with someone who didn't know the rules. But what they didn't know was that you were letting them move just long enough to trap themselves. This isn't arrogance. This is awareness. This is the sacred moment when a chosen one comes out of strategic silence and shifts the entire spiritual climate just by being. Your silence wasn't confusion. It was calibration. It was divine stillness. Because you weren't just watching people. You were watching the vibration behind the words, the patterns in the manipulation, the energy behind every room you entered. And now they're panicking. Not because you spoke, but because you haven't had to. The same ones who called you crazy are studying your calm. The same ones who mocked your absence are now analyzing your moves in silence, praying the truth doesn't come wrapped in your voice. And here's the part that haunts them. They can't undo what they did when they thought you were blind. They can't unsay what they whispered when they believed you'd never rise, but you did, quietly, precisely, powerfully. And now your very existence is judgment. You weren't reacting because you were confused. You were waiting because you were calculating. You let them think they had time, not because you were naive, but because you knew that truth doesn't need to rush. It just needs to arrive. And chosen one, that arrival is now. Your glow is justice, your calm is correction, your presence is prophecy fulfilled. So, before we tear through this mask, layer by layer, take a moment. If you've ever been underestimated in a room, you understood better than anyone. If you've ever chosen silence over screaming just to let karma unfold in peace, then this message is your mirror. Drop 777 in the comments if you're done pretending, done shrinking, done letting people mistake your discernment for weakness. When you do, you're not just claiming your identity. You're activating a signal for every chosen one who's been waiting in the shadows, quietly holding truth too sacred to cast before the blind. This isn't just content, this is confirmation. And now the silence is over. So lock in, listen closely, and whatever you do, don't walk away from this frequency. Not this time. This moment was meant for you. Let's begin. God's chosen ones. They finally realized you were just playing dumb. Now they want to cry. Number one, they thought you were clueless. You were calculating. Now they can't stop crying. Chosen one, they truly believed you didn't see it, that you were too naive, too slow, too disconnected to realize what was going on behind the scenes. But let's tell the truth now. They weren't dealing with someone clueless. They were dealing with someone covered by wisdom, covered by strategy, covered by divine discernment. What they mistook for ignorance was intelligence disguised. You weren't absent. You were absorbing. You weren't asleep. You were assessing. Does that sound familiar to you? Have you ever played along in a room full of deception, not because you were fooled, but because you were letting the mask wearers show their full face? That's what shook them to their core. Not just that you walked away, but that you saw it all and still said nothing. You let them have their moment in the spotlight, but what they didn't know is that you were documenting the scene like a director. You let their arrogance build the plot. You let their ego write the ending. They thought they were 10 steps ahead when really you were the one who paved the path they were running on. Have you ever wondered why you felt no urge to correct them, why your silence felt heavier than their words? Because real power doesn't chase noise. It listens, it studies, it builds. Ecclesiastes 3:7 says it clearly. There is a time to be silent and a time to speak. You, chosen one, were wise enough to know the difference. You weren't confused. You were being calibrated by the Spirit of God. And while they laughed, you leaned into patience. While they celebrated false victories, you let the clock tick down on their deception. Look at Albert Einstein. As a child, many labeled him slow, even intellectually disabled. He barely spoke for the first few years of his life. But what they couldn't grasp was that his mind wasn't empty. It was calculating, formulating, creating what would later change the course of human understanding. Do you see the parallel? You were never absent. You were operating on a higher frequency. Now that the truth has made its way to the surface, they're drowning in the consequences. They're not just haunted by what they did. They're haunted by the fact that you always knew. Every compliment that didn't feel right. Every moment you were excluded. Every conversation that shifted the second you left the room. You clocked it all. And now, while they search for damage control, you walk in calm authority. Let's ask the real question. Why did you stay silent? Why didn't you react? Was it fear? Number. It was foresight. You understood a key principle from Proverbs 17:27. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. That restraint was divine. You weren't just letting them expose themselves. You were letting the truth mature. And now it has grown too large for them to hide. Take Oprah Winfrey. Early in her career, she was told she didn't belong on television. She was demoted from her anchor position and told she was unfit for TV. But she didn't lash out. She didn't clap back. She waited. She grew. And when her moment came, she didn't just thrive. She redefined the entire media landscape. You see, chosen ones are never out of place. They're just positioned ahead of their time. You didn't lose your voice. You preserved it. You didn't hide. You simply stayed out of the storm they were creating for themselves. You watched them decorate their lies, thinking they were building a kingdom, when in fact they were constructing a cage. And now that you've stepped back into visibility, they don't know whether to fear you or beg for your silence again. Have you noticed how uncomfortable they become when you enter the room now? That's not your imagination, it's conviction. It's shame trying to hide behind small talk. Isaiah 30:15 says, "In quietness and trust is your strength." Your stillness was your shield. Your refusal to expose them early gave God permission to reveal them completely. And now, justice doesn't need your words. Your life is the evidence. Let's reflect on Nikola Tesla. He was mocked and dismissed during his lifetime. They said his ideas were absurd. But he didn't waste time explaining himself to small minds. He let time be his witness. And now, he's recognized as one of the greatest inventors of all time. You, chosen one, didn't come to prove anything. You came to carry truth in silence and let it erupt when the time was right. And now that time has come, every whisper they spread is echoing back. Every alliance they made out of arrogance is collapsing. Every celebration they held over your defeat is rotting in regret. Because the one they laughed at, that's the one who holds the final word. Let's not forget the biblical story of Joseph. His own brothers threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, convinced he was out of the picture. But what they didn't realize was that Joseph wasn't just a dreamer. He was a deliverer. And years later, when famine struck and their survival depended on mercy, the brother they betrayed was the one holding the keys to their redemption. Genesis 50:20 captures this perfectly. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. You too have walked through betrayal into blessing. You too have the keys. How do you move forward now, knowing you were never behind? You walk with grace. You rise with clarity. You speak only when heaven opens your mouth, because now every step you take echoes with prophecy. The same people who counted you out are counting the cost, and they can't undo what's been revealed. Remember Steve Jobs? He was fired from the very company he created, rejected by the system he built. But he didn't crumble. He recalibrated, and when he returned, he didn't just lead Apple, he transformed the world. You're walking in that same energy, chosen one. They didn't just underestimate you, they misread your entire spirit. And now they're facing a truth they can't undo. You weren't lost, you were lethal in disguise. Romans 8:28 promises, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." You didn't have to make noise. Purpose made room for you. Timing exposed what your words never had to. So here's the final reminder. Never regret your silence. It wasn't weakness. It was warfare. It wasn't delay. It was design. You let the universe speak on your behalf. You didn't clap back because you were broken. You stayed silent because you were focused. And now they are crumbling under the weight of what they thought they got away with. Let them cry. Let them scramble. Let them wrestle with the realization that while they were performing, you were preparing. You let them think they'd won the game. But chosen one, you were never playing their game to begin with. You were writing the new rules, and now it's your time. Number 2, they laughed at the one watching. Now they're begging the one awakening. Chosen one, do you remember when they laughed at your stillness? When your silence made them bold? When your absence became their favorite conversation starter? They mistook your retreat for defeat. They assumed your withdrawal was a breakdown. But let me ask you something. What if the silence wasn't surrender, but strategy? What if your quiet season was never a grave, but a garden? You weren't buried, you were planted. You see, the enemy always underestimates what God hides. They saw you step back and thought you'd step down. They mistook your quietness for confusion and your distance for defeat. But you weren't breaking, you were becoming. You didn't collapse, you cocooned. And now, the very ones who danced in mockery while you went still are stumbling in panic because they realize they never knew who you were becoming in the dark. Isaiah 40:31 declares, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles." While they thought you were finished, you were sprouting wings. While they laughed, you listened. While they whispered, you worked. You didn't vanish, you evolved. And now they're begging the one who watched it all unfold. They're trying to reach someone who no longer exists in the form they tried to contain. Have you ever noticed how the loudest laughter often masks the deepest insecurity? Why do people fear stillness so much? Is it because it reflects their own chaos? They mocked your peace because it revealed their panic. They laughed at your solitude because they couldn't survive without an audience. But chosen one, you were never seeking validation. You were preparing for revelation. Take the story of Nelson Mandela. After being imprisoned for 27 years, the world assumed his silence meant submission. But behind bars, he became unshakable. They locked his body, but not his mind. They tried to bury him in a prison cell, but his spirit soared higher than any cage they could build. And when he emerged, he didn't just walk out a free man, he walked out a global force. That's the same energy you carry. You didn't crumble, you crystallized. While they kept watching the clock, thinking your delay was your demise, you were watching their character unravel in real time. You heard the whispers, you felt the stares, you noticed the shifts in energy the moment you entered a room. But you didn't call it out. Why? Because chosen ones don't need to prove what time is already exposing. You didn't lash out, you locked in. And that's what's tormenting them now. Your calm was never emptiness. It was a loaded silence, a sacred stillness that only those with spiritual sight could understand. Psalm 27:14 reminds us, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." You weren't idle, you were in divine alignment. That's why when you re-entered, they didn't recognize you. They're looking for the version of you that was willing to shrink, but that you no longer exists. They're haunted by a ghost they can no longer manipulate. What's more terrifying than someone you tried to break now, walking in full power, unbothered, uninterested, and unrecognizable? Let me ask you something deeper. How many times did you bite your tongue while they laughed? How many nights did you stay silent to keep the peace that only cost you your own? And now they want access to a light they once mocked. The same fire they tried to extinguish now warms rooms you no longer invite them into. Remember the story of Maya Angelou. She was abused as a child and stayed silent for years, believing her voice could kill. But that silence wasn't weakness. It was a forge. When she found her voice, it became one of the most iconic of our time. You, too, have discovered that your silence was never passive. It was prophetic. They thought you disappeared. But really, you were downloading divine blueprints. They assumed their words shaped you. But it was your stillness that sharpened you. You were measuring every vibration, calculating every betrayal. You weren't absent, you were awakening. And now they're shocked that the very stillness they dismissed gave birth to a storm that doesn't rage, it rules. Proverbs 19:11 says, "A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense." You had every right to explode, but instead you elevated. You turned chaos into construction. And now your transformation speaks louder than any accusation they ever made. Let's talk about Steve Harvey. At one point he was homeless, sleeping in his car for 3 years. People laughed, doubted, and overlooked him. But he didn't waste time fighting for acceptance. He spent that season refining his craft. Now he's a household name. What looked like silence was strategy. What appeared as disappearance was development, just like you. So when they laughed, they weren't laughing at a weakness. They were mocking a mystery they couldn't comprehend. They saw stillness and assumed stagnation. But stillness is what God uses before elevation. Think about Jesus. Before the resurrection came 3 days of complete silence in the tomb. But it wasn't death. It was a setup. And now you've risen from your own tomb of misunderstanding, no longer bound by who they thought you were. Romans 13:11 declares, "The hour has come for you to wake from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed." You didn't just wake up, you ascended, and now they panic at your peace. The room shifts when you speak, not because you raised your voice, but because your spirit holds authority. You are no longer the one observing. You are the one commanding. You've learned who deserved your energy and who merely fed off it. In your silence, you learned the spiritual anatomy of every person around you, who drained you, who dishonored you, who disguised themselves as allies while praying for your fall. But you didn't confront them. You outgrew them, and that chosen one is the most divine revenge, elevation without explanation. Have you heard the story of Tyler Perry? He was laughed at, rejected, and left to struggle while writing plays that no one came to see. But he kept creating in silence, kept believing. And when the moment came, he built his own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. You're doing the same. You're not waiting for permission. You are walking in power. So now, when they flinch in your presence, stutter when your name is brought up, and shift uncomfortably in rooms you no longer attend, understand this. They're haunted not by what you did, but by what they didn't see coming. The version of you they tried to sabotage evolved while they celebrated your supposed failure. They laughed at the quiet. But now the quiet has become the quake. You were never the problem. You were the prophecy. Let me ask you one final question. What if your greatest strength was never in how loud you roared, but in how silently you survived? The old you, gone, buried in the soil of their assumptions, and in your place stands someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't apologize, and doesn't look back. So let them beg. Let them remember every laugh, every whisper, every attempt to erase your presence. Because now the light is on, and only you know how to walk through it with no shame, no need for approval, and no tolerance for manipulation. They don't laugh anymore, chosen one. They fear, because the one who watched in silence is now the one rising in power. And this time, you're not playing small to protect their comfort. You're walking fully awake. Number 3, they misread your peace as permission. Now their panic is personal. Chosen one, have you ever sat in silence and felt the room misunderstand your stillness as surrender? Have you ever watched people interpret your peace as approval, your calm as weakness, your grace as a green light to keep pushing boundaries you never gave them access to? That's the deception they lived in, and now their panic has arrived, because your peace was never theirs to abuse. They thought your stillness meant they had control. They believed your silence was fear, that your refusal to engage meant you had nothing to offer. But you weren't afraid, and you weren't empty. You were fully aware. You were observing without reacting, studying without responding. Why? Because you understood something they never did. Peace is not permission. And your silence was not surrender, it was surveillance. As Ecclesiastes 3:1 tells us, there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. You knew your season was coming. You knew your stillness wasn't final. It was foundational. You weren't hiding, you were holding back, you weren't retreating, you were recharging. They saw the surface and assumed the depths were gone. But chosen one, you were always deep. So deep they never saw what was building underneath. Take the example of Rosa Parks. Many reduced her act of civil disobedience to a quiet moment on a bus, but what they didn't understand was that her silence was a roar. Her stillness was resistance. And that moment of peace, refusing to move, ignited a fire that would shift an entire nation. The same is true of you. You didn't need to scream. You didn't need to argue. You simply removed yourself and the entire atmosphere fell apart. Now they're confused. Now they're crumbling. Why? Because their false confidence depended on your presence. They felt powerful only because you let them exist in your peace. They never created balance. They borrowed yours. And the moment you took it back, the chaos that always lived beneath their image of control came roaring to the surface. Chosen one, let me ask you, how many times did you give grace and they called it approval? How many times did you stay calm while they stirred the pot, thinking you were too slow to notice? But you noticed. You always noticed. You just chose to be the observer rather than the reactor. You understood what Philippians 4:7 meant when it said, "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." That peace wasn't weakness. It was divine protection. It guarded you, and it guarded them too, until you pulled it back. And now their panic is no longer theoretical. It's personal. It's showing up in their voices, in their body language, in the way they second-guess themselves when your name is mentioned. They're flinching not because you did anything new, but because you stopped doing what they secretly depended on. You stopped making room for their mess. You stopped babysitting their dysfunction. And that, more than anything, has thrown their entire illusion into free fall. Do you remember when people said you were too nice, too soft, too passive? That's what they say when they don't understand how much power it takes to stay silent in a storm. That's what they say when they don't realize the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't need to defend themselves, because the truth defends them. Chosen ones don't need to clap back. They shift, and when they shift, everything moves. Nelson Mandela once said, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." Chosen one, you weren't absent, you were triumphant. You didn't respond to their provocations because you'd already mastered the environment. Your peace wasn't passive, it was architecture. It was holding the space together, and now that it's gone, the structure is collapsing under its own dishonesty. They built their narratives on your stillness. They thought if you didn't speak, you must agree. But what they didn't see was that you were giving them enough time to reveal themselves. You let the story stretch. You let the mask fall. And now that it has, they can't recognize themselves in the mirror of your truth. Let's pause and ask, what were they really scared of all along? Your voice, number. They were scared of the moment you'd realize you never needed to use it to prove your worth. That's what has finally come. You've realized that distance is sometimes the loudest answer, that walking away is more powerful than any confrontation. That silence doesn't mean surrender, it means sovereignty. Just like the story of Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers. He was quiet, gentle, peaceful, and yet his presence transformed generations. His soft tone disarmed critics, and his stillness became a revolution in a chaotic media world. You carry that same disruptive calm. You are not moved by disorder. You command order through presence alone. Romans 16:20 says, "The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet." Notice the irony? Peace, not noise, is what crushes chaos. You carried that kind of authority without saying a word, and now they finally see it. But too late. They abused your grace, they manipulated your restraint, and they confused divine patience with personal permission. That's why their panic is personal, because they realize the only thing holding their house of cards together was the peace you carried. You were the stabilizer in an environment built on dysfunction. They thrived because you kept things from exploding. But when you left, everything combusted. Why? Because you were the pressure valve. You were the still hand on the ticking clock. You were the one absorbing chaos to give others a false sense of balance. But no more. You stepped away, and now the energy you used to stabilize them is fueling your own evolution. Look at Princess Diana. She was the calm in the storm of royal spectacle. Her silence was often misunderstood. Her gentleness was criticized. But when she stepped out of the royal system, the world saw who she really was. Her presence was never the problem. It was the balance. And once it was gone, the whole institution trembled. That's your story too, chosen one. They didn't understand what your presence preserved until it was gone. Let's be clear, you didn't remove yourself to punish them. You removed yourself to protect your peace. You stopped playing the role they assigned to you because you outgrew the illusion. And now, they're not just grieving your absence, they're being confronted by their own dependence on the lie your stillness sustained. Psalm 34:14 reminds us, "Turn from evil and do good, seek peace and pursue it." You pursued peace, but when others tried to corrupt it, you took it back. You reclaimed what they tried to exploit. And now they are feeling the loss of what they never appreciated. So let them sweat, let them flinch, let them second-guess every moment they assumed you were irrelevant. Because you were never irrelevant, you were irreplaceable. You were the order they mistook for weakness. You were the stillness they mistook for submission. And now that you've risen, the system they built around your silence is crumbling into dust. Number 4, you played powerless, so they dropped their guard. Now they can't survive your rise. Chosen one, they thought they had you all figured out, didn't they? They believed your quiet meant confusion, that your soft demeanor meant submission, and your silence meant surrender. But let me ask you, how powerful is the person who knows the truth but chooses to watch in stillness? How lethal is the one who lowers their light, not because they are dim, but because they are deliberate? You weren't invisible. You chose to be unseen. You pulled your energy back, not because you were broken, but because you were preparing. You didn't shrink because of fear. You crouched for leverage. You allowed them to believe you were naive, unaware, harmless, because that belief made them reckless. They lowered their guard, thinking they'd won, but that was your strategy all along. Proverbs 13:16 reminds us, "A wise man thinks ahead, a fool doesn't, and even brags about it. While they boasted, you built. While they plotted, you positioned. You were never powerless. You were practicing precision. And now the moment you stop playing small, everything built on their assumptions is collapsing like a house of cards in the wind." Have you ever considered the strength it takes to pretend you don't see? To smile while you're being studied? To stay quiet when everything in you knows the truth? They underestimated your silence, chosen one. But you weren't silent out of weakness. You were silent because you didn't need to speak to shift the atmosphere. You let them think they were in control, but all the while, you were the one orchestrating the lesson. It's like chess master Didnt Polgar, one of the greatest female chess players in history. She once allowed her opponent to think they had the upper hand for nearly half the game, making small, calculated moves. But by the time the endgame arrived, every move her opponent had made became a trap of their own creation. That's you. You weren't being checkmated. You were baiting the board. You weren't walking on eggshells. You were walking through enemy lines like a silent general, ready for the moment when your truth would speak without sound. Let's break this down. They thought you were beneath them. They assumed your softness meant stupidity, so they smiled in your face, whispered lies behind your back, and stacked the deck thinking you'd never notice. But the whole time, you were counting the cards. You didn't react because you didn't need to. You already knew. You let their arrogance unfold naturally. Why fight the fire when you can let it burn out on its own? Ecclesiastes 7:9 says, "Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools." You chose wisdom. You chose restraint. You chose to wait, knowing that exposure was inevitable. And when it came, it didn't just expose their lies. It exposed their need for you to stay small in order for their illusion to survive. Do you realize now how often they relied on your dimmed light to feel bright? They needed you quiet to feel confident. They needed you doubtful to feel dominant. But what they never expected was the moment you'd stop crouching and begin to rise. That's what's happening now. Your posture changed, and your shift is breaking every mask they once wore with ease. Let's consider Howard Schultz, the man behind Starbucks. He grew up in the projects, poor and unseen. He spent years watching, learning, observing the systems of success from a distance. When he finally made his move, he wasn't just starting a business, he was creating a global cultural shift. The quiet boy they ignored became the man whose name shaped an empire. What looked like silence was observation. What felt like powerlessness was potential under pressure, just like you. You let them think they were building something on top of you, but really you were watching them build something that couldn't stand. Their entire strategy relied on the assumption that you were unaware, that you were too soft to respond. And now they're scrambling because they never planned for your awakening. They never prepared for the moment you'd stand in your fullness. Isaiah 30:15 says, "In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength." You trusted the process. You knew that sometimes the most spiritual warfare you can do is to stay still and let time unravel the lies. And that's exactly what happened. The same people who manipulated in private are now being exposed in public, and not by your hands, but by the momentum of truth you never stopped carrying. Let me ask you, chosen one, when did you realize you weren't actually powerless, just patient? Was it when their stories started to contradict themselves? Was it when the people they confided in turned back to you, eyes wide with realization? You didn't have to scream, you just had to stop playing along. And when you did, the entire performance fell apart. Take the story of Simone Biles. For years, she dominated gymnastics quietly, without theatrics. But when she decided to pull back for her mental health during the 2020 Olympics, the world tried to spin it as weakness. What they didn't understand was that true power is in knowing when to pause, when to walk away, and when to rise again on your own terms. That's exactly what you've done. Your stillness was power, and your return is prophecy fulfilled. They should have known better. They should have guarded their lies tighter. They should have played fair, but they assumed you'd never stand. And now they're facing the fallout. Not because you retaliated, but because you reclaimed yourself. They never had real strength. They had borrowed confidence based on a false perception of your worth. You were never beneath them. You just bent low enough to let them show their hand. And now their games have turned into their downfall. The alliances they built, cracking, the reputation they curated, deteriorating. The version of you they thought they'd outsmarted, gone. 2 Corinthians 10:4 tells us, "The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds." Your weapon was never revenge, it was revelation. And now that you've stood up in your true form, they're facing the stronghold they built with lies, unable to hold it together without the illusion of your powerlessness. Let's be real, they underestimated the wrong one. They assumed your humility was helplessness, but now they see that your grace was strength, your silence was surveillance, and your patience was a divine trap that never needed you to act out. Just stand up. Like Malala Yousafzai, silenced by violence, she rose, not by rage, but by resolve. She didn't fight back in the way her enemies expected. She elevated. She became a voice for millions by simply standing in her truth. You, too, have shifted the game by no longer shrinking into roles they wrote for you. Your presence now tells a different story, one of sovereignty. So let them stumble, let them panic, let them drown in the silence they once mocked. Because what they're feeling now isn't fear of you, it's fear of what you represent. You are the living proof that power doesn't have to shout. It just has to stand. And when it stands, every lie that leaned on your silence collapses. Number 5. Now that you've stopped pretending, their illusion is collapsing because you were the structure all along. Chosen one, let's get to the heart of it. Have you noticed how everything around them began to crumble the moment you stopped playing small? The second you stopped pretending not to see, not to know, not to feel, the entire environment shifted. Why do you think that is? Could it be that they never had real power to begin with? Could it be that what they called control was really just your silence keeping things from spiraling? They leaned on your stillness like a crutch, dependent, ungrateful, and unaware that it was the only thing keeping their dysfunction upright. As long as you kept playing along, their narrative made sense. Their lies fit the scene. Their mask stayed secure. But the moment you reclaimed your truth, stopped absorbing the chaos, and stepped back into awareness, their illusion began to rot. And now, they're not just confused, they're terrified. Galatians 6:7 speaks this truth plainly. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. They sowed dishonesty into your silence, and now they're reaping the harvest of everything they tried to hide beneath your peace. You were never the one holding the secrets. You were the one holding the space. And now that you've stepped out, the atmosphere is no longer safe for manipulation. Have you ever wondered why your presence, without saying a word, now causes tension? Why rooms feel heavier when you enter? Because they know, they feel it. The system that once fed on your humility is choking on its own arrogance. And the best part? You didn't lift a hand. You just stopped holding theirs. Look at the life of Maya Angelou. She once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." You chose to believe them, not when they lied to your face, but when they kept expecting you to carry the weight of it. You chose to stop pretending, and just like Maya, you realized that your truth was never a burden. It was the boundary they feared. So now, they're stumbling through the ruins. Why? Because everything they built depended on you not waking up. Their status, their influence, their storyline, it all relied on your silence. As long as you kept swallowing pain, they could serve up false peace. As long as you absorbed the chaos, they could call themselves calm. But now, the sponge is dry, and their mask is melting. Psalm 55:21 says, "His speech was smooth as butter, yet war was in his heart. His words were more soothing than oil, yet they were drawn swords. They sweet-talked you while waging war behind your back." But what they didn't understand is that a chosen one doesn't need to scream to shift a room. A chosen one only needs to remember who they are, and everything else begins to quake. Do you see it now? Your restraint was the backbone of the whole structure. You were the quiet order, the emotional regulator, the spiritual covering they never earned but gladly leaned on. You took the hits not because you lacked power, but because you had it. And when you finally said, "No more," the entire balance they built on your back tipped over. Let's talk about Serena Williams. For years she was criticized, scrutinized, labeled too emotional, too aggressive, too much. Yet, all the while, she kept winning, kept training, kept rising. And when she stopped pretending she had to shrink to fit in, the world couldn't deny her greatness anymore. That's your story too, chosen one. The second you stopped apologizing for your presence, they had to face the truth. They only felt powerful when you were pretending. Let's pause and ask, what exactly did they fear? Your voice or your vision? The answer is both. Your voice carries truth, but your vision, that's prophetic. That's what makes your awakening so dangerous. You didn't return loud. You returned clear. You came back glowing, grounded, and no longer invested in their performance. And that, more than anything, is what's unraveling them. You were the atmosphere, the oxygen, the stabilizer, the reason their world didn't cave in. And now that you've walked away, their system is suffocating under the weight of its own lies. They called you too sensitive, too quiet, too intense. Not because it was true, but because those labels kept you questioning your own discernment. But now your discernment is sharp. Now your clarity is contagious. And now others are starting to see what you saw all along. Let's bring in Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor and author of Man's Search for Meaning. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." You didn't argue with the storm. You evolved through it. You changed. And that change, internal, invisible, undeniable, is what's shaking them now. Because the version of you that once played dumb is gone. In your place stands someone rooted, radiant, and no longer afraid of being seen. Isaiah 61 declares, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." That's what's happening now. Your light is rising, and the shadows are panicking. You didn't have to destroy anything. You simply had to stop dimming. And now their reality, one built on your silence, is exposed in broad daylight. You didn't ruin their story. You just stopped writing yourself in as the villain they needed you to be. You stopped holding their guilt. You stopped covering their insecurity. And now that you've exited the scene, they're stuck in a play with no climax, no direction, and no one to cast blame on but themselves. Let's not forget Oprah Winfrey. When she was told early in her career that she wasn't fit for television, she didn't fight back in rage. She built a platform no one could touch. She stopped asking for permission and started walking in authority. And now, the very system that dismissed her tries to mimic her. That's your energy now. You're not bitter, you're better. And they're choking on the peace you never owed them. So when they squirm in your presence, when they scramble to rewrite the past, let them. That's not your concern. Their collapse is not your fault, it's their consequence. Your only responsibility now is to keep walking in alignment. Keep standing in truth, because your presence is no longer a lifeline to anyone's lie. Romans 8:19 reminds us, "For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God." The world wasn't waiting for you to fight, it was waiting for you to stand. And now that you've stopped pretending, the illusion is dead, their panic is personal. And your light, it's prophetic. You were the pulse, you were the rhythm, you were the energy that held the whole dysfunctional melody together. And now that you've pulled your frequency out of the noise, everything off-key is being revealed. So let them fall apart. Let them tremble in the wake of your awakening. Let them realize that the storm they feared wasn't outside of them. It was the absence of you. And now that you're no longer pretending, the mask is off, the charade is over, and the truth is center stage. Number 6. Stop apologizing for the light that scares them, because it's not too much. It's a mirror they can't escape. Chosen one, have you ever paused and asked yourself, why do they flinch when I simply show up? Is it your tone, your posture, your words? Or is it something deeper, something they can't explain but can't ignore either? The truth is, it's not that your light is too much. It's that your light reveals too much. And what it reveals, it terrifies them. Let's stop dancing around the reality. You've been apologizing for how you were designed, not because you doubted your own power, but because they couldn't handle it. Their discomfort became your responsibility. Their insecurity, your emotional burden. Have you ever felt guilty just for being at peace while they were hiding chaos? For simply knowing something without needing proof? But enough is enough. You don't owe anyone an apology for being exactly what God created. Psalm 139 verse 14 reminds us, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So why did you question the design when it made others squirm? Why did you silence your clarity just to avoid disturbing the illusions they clung to? Let's be honest, what were they really afraid of? Was it your emotions, your tone, your presence? Number, they were afraid of your awakening. They knew the moment you realized your light wasn't a flaw, but a divine signal, their entire system of control would collapse. Your presence wasn't chaos, it was clarity. And that clarity stripped away their excuses. Do you remember the moments you second-guessed your intuition? When you told yourself, maybe I'm just overthinking, maybe it's me, maybe I'm too much. That wasn't humility. That was internalized gaslighting. And who taught you to do that? Was it the ones who pretended your awareness was aggression? The ones who labeled your discernment as drama? Chosen one, how many times did you read the room perfectly, only to convince yourself you were wrong because no one else was brave enough to admit the truth? You weren't crazy. You were calibrated. Your gift of insight was precise, and they couldn't manipulate a person who wasn't blind. That's why they labeled you. That's why they tried to shrink you. When people don't want to be seen, they attack the one who sees them. And you were the mirror. But mirrors don't distort reality, they reflect it. And what they hated was never your glow. It was the reflection they couldn't escape when they looked into your eyes. Luke 8:17 declares, For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. You were that divine exposure. You were the moment their mask began to slip without warning. You didn't have to say much. Your presence did the speaking. So why did you spend so much time holding your tongue in rooms where truth was already bleeding through the walls? Take someone like Chadwick Boseman, quiet, focused, purposeful. He didn't need to announce his greatness. His presence spoke louder than any performance. And when people found out he was carrying something far heavier than anyone realized, they weren't just surprised, they were convicted. That's you, chosen one. Your strength is invisible until it's undeniable. So here's the question. Why did you shrink for those who couldn't expand? Why did you bend to fit inside containers God never designed for you? You spent so long managing their insecurities that you nearly convinced yourself that your presence was the problem. But it wasn't. Your presence was the proof. Proof that they were never as strong as they claimed to be. How long did you carry their comfort while they trampled your clarity? You played small so they could feel big. You quieted your discernment so they could preserve their delusions. And when you spoke the truth, they called it attack. They labeled you too deep, too sensitive, too intense. But now you see it, don't you? That was never feedback. That was fear. Isaiah 61 says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." You're not here to fit in. You're here to illuminate. And every room that twisted your truth was actually trembling from the revelation you carried. Let's talk about Frida Kahlo. Her work was raw, unfiltered, unapologetic. She was criticized for being too emotional, too honest, too intense. But it was that very intensity that made her legendary. She didn't tone herself down for comfort. She turned herself up until the world couldn't look away. Sound familiar? How many times did you try diplomacy? How often did you soften your edges, swallow the tension, smile through disrespect, just to avoid being too much? But it never worked, did it? Because the issue wasn't your intensity, it was their dishonesty. Your presence pulled truth to the surface like gravity, and instead of evolving, they chose to demonize you. But you're not the villain in this story. You're the signal. You are the shift they ignored until the storm arrived and your silence turned into confirmation. You didn't need revenge. You needed release. And that release of the need to be understood by the wrong people is what has finally set you free. Matthew 5:14-16 declares, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others." You're not meant to hide. You're not made to dilute. You're built to disrupt. And those who called your fire too much are now stumbling in their own smoke. What does your light really do? It confronts, it convicts, it reveals. And the people who felt off around you weren't reacting to your energy. They were reacting to the fact that your presence exposed what they worked hard to keep buried. They don't hate you. They hate what you show them about themselves. Let's be real. They weren't scared of your voice. They were scared of what your clarity could dismantle. They were afraid you'd stop playing along, stop questioning yourself, stop twisting your truth into something easier for them to swallow. And now that you have, now that you're standing fully in it, they can't breathe in the same space you used to make comfortable for them. Look at Lady Gaga. Bold, unapologetic, constantly attacked for being too much, too different, too strange. But she didn't shrink. She became a symbol for authenticity. She turned her truth into a movement. That's the power of not apologizing. That's what your light does when you stop editing it. So, why would you ever go back to pretending? What would you gain from shrinking again to make room for those who never intended to grow? You were never too much. You were simply ahead of schedule. And now, everyone else is catching up to what you've known all along. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be light. So let them call it what they want. Let them twist the story. Let them whisper. But you keep glowing. You keep speaking. You keep aligning. Because your truth doesn't need permission. It needs expression. Your energy is the earthquake their illusions weren't built to survive. Romans 12:2 tells us, Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You've renewed, you've risen, and now the rooms that once tried to silence you are suffocating in the absence of your agreement. So here's your final reminder, chosen one. Stop apologizing for the frequency you carry. Stop diluting the divine for people who couldn't survive full volume. You were never the problem. You were the mirror. You didn't cause the storm. They just never wanted to admit they were already drowning. Number 7. The same ones who mocked you are now studying you in secret, because endurance taught what ego never could. Chosen one, have you noticed the shift yet? The same voices that once mocked your silence are now echoing your wisdom. The same people who rolled their eyes when you walked away are now quietly stalking your steps, like disciples reading sacred scripture. And the question is, why? Why are they watching so closely now? Why does your timeline suddenly read like a roadmap to their peace? Could it be that what they once ridiculed, they now revere, without ever admitting it out loud? Could it be that the mockery was always a mask for misunderstanding and envy? They called you delusional, remember, said you were too intense, too deep, too off-brand. But now they're dissecting your captions, now they're copying your rituals, now they're quoting your language, privately, of course. Because to acknowledge your rise would be to admit they misjudged the very foundation of your being. But the truth is, they never expected you to survive. They thought the loneliness would consume you. They thought the silence would unravel you. They thought you'd fade into obscurity like a forgotten whisper. But let me ask you, was it isolation or was it incubation? Isaiah 43:2 reminds us, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned." You weren't just surviving in silence. You were being refined in it. They couldn't hear the whispers of your purpose in the noise, so they assumed you had none. But God was speaking, and you were listening. Take Elon Musk. He was laughed at, dismissed, even sued by those who couldn't grasp his vision, but he kept building, alone, quietly, through ridicule, and now those same institutions are trying to partner with him. It's the same cycle. The rejected becomes the reference, the mocked becomes the model. Let's be real. They were never teachers of truth. They were performers in a play that depended on you staying unsure of your own script. They mastered applause, you mastered alignment. While they flaunted charisma, you cultivated character. While they worked the room, you worked the furnace. You see, they knew how to entertain, but you knew how to endure. And that's why they're studying you now, not because you went viral, but because you went vertical. You climbed a mountain they mocked from the base. And now they're out of breath, trying to catch up to a climb they refuse to take seriously. Psalm 23:5 says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." That's what's happening now, isn't it? You're seated, you're still, and yet all eyes are on you. Why? Because they're hungry for what you carry, but not ready to pay what you paid. Do they remember how they tried to define you before you found your footing? Do they recall the labels? Too emotional, too spiritual, too intense? That wasn't analysis. That was strategy. A strategy to get you to question yourself before the world could witness your becoming. But chosen one, the truth outlives every rumor. Think of Brené Brown. For years, her research on vulnerability was dismissed as soft, too emotional, unscientific. But she kept speaking, kept studying, kept aligning. Now her work is considered foundational in leadership, therapy, and personal growth. The irony, the same critics now quote her like gospel. Sound familiar? Let me ask you something. When did you first realize they were watching? Was it the sudden shift in tone? The awkward nods in rooms where you were once ignored? the subtle mimicking of your words, your values, your rhythms. They're not just interested in you, they're trying to reverse engineer your anointing. But what they don't realize is, you didn't build this in the spotlight. You built this in the shadows. You didn't get here by performing. You got here by bleeding, by breaking, by burying versions of yourself you never showed anyone. You rose not by being understood, but by understanding yourself when no one else could. That's why they can't replicate you, because your glow wasn't crafted, it was carved through the wilderness. Romans 5:3-4 gives you the blueprint. Suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. That's the real formula, and it can't be mimicked in a mirror or captured in a caption. Because while they studied aesthetics, you studied spirit. While they mastered surface, you went subterranean. Let's talk about Viola Davis, overlooked for years, typecast, minimized. But she didn't bend, she deepened. Her performances aren't just seen, they're felt. And now everyone wants to learn from her, but they forget. Her strength wasn't in the roles she played. It was in the life she survived to get there. You are walking the same path. They're studying your moves now because you've become undeniable. You didn't retaliate. You didn't campaign. You didn't demand recognition. You just remained. And your consistency did what their strategy never could. It lasted. So what's haunting them now? It's not your success. It's your certainty, your peace, your clarity. That's what they're trying to decode. How did you rise without begging? How did you evolve without applause? How did you survive every storm they assumed would destroy you? And more importantly, how did you do it without becoming bitter? Philippians 4:13 holds your answer. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Your endurance wasn't fueled by ego. It was fueled by purpose. You didn't rise to prove them wrong. You rose because you were no longer willing to betray yourself, to keep their narrative alive. Now, let them watch, let them study, let them mimic the surface while never understanding the soil. Because what they crave, peace, clarity, presence, can't be copied. It has to be earned. And you earned it in rooms where your name was either ignored or twisted. And now that it's spoken with weight, the silence you once endured has become your applause. So, chosen one, keep moving, keep shining. Let them research your steps, copy your methods, even quote your truth without citation. It doesn't matter, because no matter how closely they study, they'll never be able to duplicate the why behind your walk. You didn't do it for them. You did it for God. You did it for you. And that, more than anything, is what they'll never understand. So, walk tall, chosen one. Don't look back. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Let them try to reverse engineer a path they never had the strength to take. You didn't just arrive, you ascended. And every quiet decision, every hidden heartbreak, every time you chose silence over retaliation, was a spiritual brick in the foundation of the authority you now carry. That authority didn't come from applause. It came from obedience, endurance, and a relationship with the divine that no performance can mimic. Let them watch. Let them study. Let them scramble to piece together a strategy built from fragments of your courage. Because the truth is, they don't have the tools. They weren't forged in the fire like you were. You didn't just survive what was meant to break you. You transformed in it, alone, rejected, ridiculed. And now you walk with a clarity that can't be copied and a presence that can't be denied. You are the lesson they never saw coming. And now they find themselves quietly enrolled in a class they never intended to attend, taught by the very soul they once dismissed. And now, here we are, full circle. The same ones who mocked you, doubted you, and wrote you off are now the ones trying to mimic your discipline, imitate your peace, and walk in the wisdom they once ignored. You didn't need revenge. You became the reminder. You didn't need to speak louder. Your alignment became the message. And now your silence echoes louder than their noise ever could. Your consistency exposed what their chaos tried to hide. If this message has stirred something in your spirit, if it reminded you of the truth you've been carrying in silence, I invite you to share it with someone who needs to remember. Pretending is over. Authenticity is the new frequency. And alignment doesn't beg for attention. It simply moves in quiet power and transforms everything around it. To every single one of you who has walked with me on this journey, thank you. Your presence, your openness, your willingness to receive these truths is sacred. And for those of you who have chosen to support this work through the Super Thanks feature, please know that I am deeply grateful. Your generosity helps make it possible to keep these messages alive and reaching others. But whether you give or not, I want you to know this from the bottom of my heart. I see you. I honor you. And I'm thankful you're here. Your attention alone is a gift, and I do not take it for granted. May God continue to guide you in all things. May you walk forward covered in discernment, protected by purpose, and surrounded by a peace that no lie can penetrate. May you never again apologize for your presence, your insight, or your glow. You're not too much. You were simply called before they were ready. And that's not your burden, that's your brilliance. Keep standing, keep shining, keep becoming, because the moment you stop pretending, the entire room changed. And the world has no choice now but to adjust to the truth you've always carried. Your time is not coming. Your time is already here.